on the go. We're meeting the ends of the Gama people, and we respect the spiritual connection of those people with the land. So on our agenda, just trying to figure out whether we've got. Not sure. Where do apologies come? I'm not sure whether we've got one or not.
We don't have one.
Okay. All right. Confirmation of minutes of our last meeting. The minutes were circulated. I'm sure everyone's committed them to memory. The minutes of the meetings of 14 March and 11 April. We'll take them as a package unless anyone's got any comments. Someone like to move that they be adopted? Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Seconded. Paul, thank you. All those in favour?
Moved that, Tim.
Hmm?
Who moved it?
Councillor Pritchard. Adjourned business nil. Present Chairman's report nil. Presentations nil. Deputations nil. Okay. Agenda item number 1 is the external audit interim management letter. And we're being asked to note this report received from the external auditors in relation to the 23-24 interim visit. There's a summary there, some background. I'll just and a discussion. I'll just open it for comment and questions. Oh, hi, welcome, Andrew.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. Is there any comment on agenda item 7.1? Perhaps I've got just a couple of quick questions. The recalculation of the leave, I assume that didn't have any impact on the long service leave liabilities.
Through the chair, sorry, can you confirm what you mean by the recalculation of the leave? Is this in terms of the comment about the two staff that converted to casual?
Yes.
No, correct, because that leave was paid out. So there was a recalculation done to make sure that the amount that we were paying out would be correct. So that would have reduced the provision for annual leave and long service leave.
So if they go from permanent to casual, that they stop accruing long
correct.
service leave? Yeah, okay. The only other slight query I had is on the comment that all outstanding requests have been responded to and provided in full by external evidence by 3 April. Very good. Yeah. If not, would somebody like to?
Through the chair, I'm wondering, David's present. Are we going to talk to him at this item or at another item? Just.
I'm sorry, Paul.
David, the audit partner, is present. I'm just wondering, is this the item? Because I wouldn't mind having a dialogue, just in terms of the. I'll call them discrepancies, variances of opinion in relation to some of the items, but I don't have a specific question, but yeah, I wouldn't mind having that opportunity given that he's present.
Yeah, sure. In doing that, can I just get a piece of clarification of the process? When we get to year end, we excuse everyone from the room and we hear from the auditors. Yeah? And so that doesn't happen until what, August or something. Yeah. So here we're just talking about the interim letter, and we're not really, I don't think, talking about any management issues or anything like that. Is that right?
So through the chair, generally the process would be that at this meeting we would discuss, and the auditors are here to offer comment and have discussion about the two items that are in here, which is their interim audit letter and the external audit plan. Then at year end, we would have a separate confidential item, which is basically an in-camera session where the auditors can discuss with the committee without the presence of staff any matters or concerns arising from that audit.
Okay. Thank you. Over to you, Paul.
And so I think I might invite David Papa and Matthew Bonato to come forward. So to introduce to the committee, David Papa is is the director, the partner for Bentley's. So apologies, and Matthew Bonato is the director, and they have been assigned to City of Onkaparinga as part of the audit schedule.
Yeah. Chair, would you like us to talk to our regards or just take it by exception and question? Happy to work either way. It's at your discretion.
Something you want to draw to our attention, please feel free.
I'll actually hand over to Matt today. Matt will take you through the management letter. Ideally, just calling out some of the key points. They're there. We appreciate that you would have read them, no doubt, but certainly happy to then take questions thereafter and expand. But Matt will talk you through them in the first instance.
Thank you. Really, at a high level, it's really just to go over the three key issues and to provide the Audit and Risk Committee with a bit of an update regarding actual progress. So we have conducted our interim audit visit. We've gone through, we've commenced and started to address the risks where we can. We did have some delays, and we've listed out a couple of the things that we still haven't had a chance to address so that everyone knows exactly where we're at and what impacts that'll have on the timing. The two key findings really just to, I suppose, raise to your attention is really just the clarity on the self-assessment process for the internal control environment. Really in terms of just the documentation that goes in there. So everyone's aware it's not as clear as we would expect and what we would find, as useful. So bring that to your attention. And the other one was with regard to the independent review. So there's a few areas where we're not really seeing that evidence of review. And so we can't always assume that that's necessarily in place. And so the impact that has is for the next layer up that's relying on that evidence, such as the Audit and Risk Committee, you would necessarily be more exposed to any errors or fraud not fraud, but you're exposed, right? Because you're reviewing that information. So it's up to you to have that more in-depth look where there's potentially not that review in place. We do note that there are a lot of preventative controls in place and those are operating effectively. So we don't see any material risks, but we did want to, I suppose, raise that point to your attention that that's currently how we perceive it. But happy to take any questions.
Through the chair, I appreciate that we've got some timing issues and also the report is at a certain date and things may have changed in the interim, which is a month or so. I'm more interested in, I suppose, I didn't want you to be sitting here in September or October and saying, well, we knew about this in April, May, and it's still the same. Did you get a sense that the issues that you've identified that were perhaps not to your, preferred standard, choosing the words carefully here, did you get a sense that there was an attitude towards embracing that and remedying that, or was there resistance or somewhere in between? And I'm probably more interested in that rather than exactly what's here, because this can change in 6 months, as you say, but more around, is it likely to reach those standards or hard to predict or not sure?
It is hard to predict. Previous engagement with management, they're generally open to adapting the process when necessary and, coming to the table and basically discussing ways we can improve the process. So yes, there is an issue. I would hope that it would be addressed by year end. I think that's probably the most I can really provide comfort on that matter.
One of the mechanisms we put in place is a regular catch up throughout the audit period. And I think that worked quite well last year. We're going to run that again this year through the audit period. There'll be a pre-final audit meeting, essentially, gathering of the minds, and progressively throughout that way. If there are any disconnects in the information provision timelines or any matter, we'll be able to deal with it quite proactively with the management team. So you know, how will it play out? Well, I don't know. We need to live it out. But I think we are collectively putting in whatever control mechanisms along the way that we can to give the best possible outcome. Yeah.
Just a fairly generic one, if I can. On page 18, there's discussion about some extra material that you're looking for. And some of it relates to the approval of purchase orders, which are known as the delegation of authority. Just outside of that, I assume you're aware that half the staff of this organisation have a financial delegation. And it's just I suppose, a question without notice. I'm just wondering from your experience whether that's a regular thing, because that to me seems a high number of staff to have financial delegations.
Yeah, fair question. The challenge with that, and I don't have in front of me, is the context behind thresholds. If they're all quite minor, I can see that it might be about a operational agility. But if you're saying half of the staff have $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 limits, that would certainly concern me. I would expect on those upper limits to be quite a consolidated group. I don't, as I said, I don't have it in front of me, and we haven't seen any non-compliance to the framework. Our role isn't to consider the framework. So I know it sounds like a bit of a cop-out in some respects. It might be a good internal audit project if I can. I know you've got KPMG that you've retained to help you out with that. I think they would be in a better position. We have seen many councils where there'd be an element of low spend authority far and wide. Typically and traditionally that would have been done through credit cards, with a lot of the focus on credit cards in the past. Some of that's dialed back in and it's turned into a delegation of authority under procurement processes instead. It's not uncommon, but it comes back to your individual appetite as well.
Okay, thanks.
And just a minor thing, I assume there is a table of delegations somewhere. Yeah.
And just I can remember reading comments previously in audits about additional time being scheduled to follow our year-end visit dates, complete the above testing, because you haven't got all the information that's available. So I just put in with the staff, but I've seen that before. This comes at extra time and costs above what would normally be. So I guess the question is, what are you doing to try and mitigate the fact that we're not presenting or providing the audit with the information that they need to complete the audits in a timely manner?
So through the chair, as David mentioned, throughout the year-end audit process, we do have regular catch-ups. So we schedule them, particularly in the first couple of weeks, 2 or 3 times a week, so that we're regularly checking in and making sure what's outstanding, what information do you need, what further clarification do you need, and that helps us to ensure that we're providing the level of information that is required. Some of the feedback that we got as part of the interim audit, when we went back with some feedback on this letter, was that there was perhaps too much information provided, which then also comes at an additional cost in terms of the audit team having to go through that to find what they need. So it is about striking that balance of not presenting too much, but not presenting too little. And I think those regular check-ins that we do have with them at year end do help with that process.
Yeah, thank you. And just on page 19, it's just a comment you mentioned about a risk. So just to clarify, was there a concern in relation to the audits that what was required is, dare I say, generic, as opposed to more specific in relation to the audits that, or the manner in which the audits were supposed to be conducted?
For clarity, is that in regards to the self-assessment process?
Yeah, you've got a risk. You said general and generic wording is subject to interpretation, which might, so
the internal control assessment tool effectively had some generic wording in there. So and that's exactly what we're concerned with. Concern maybe using a loose sense in this case. The key I'd like to draw out before I go into my next comment is actual practice appears to be appropriate. So you've got that level of assurance, certainly from what we tested, and keeping in mind we are a sample-based testing function. So it is about the fact that if there's a generic terminology within your control track, I think it is ultimately system, the reviewer and the assessor of those controls that validate them on an annual process or whatever the cycle might be, if it is generic, it is subject to interpretation. So that's where there could be disconnect between what's actually happening on the ground and the reviewer reviewing the comment or the technical control. So there's just that increased risk of disconnect in your actual application. And that's what we're just trying to draw to attention, that there should be a bit more alignment behind the framework and actual activity that's happening with the controls on the ground.
Yeah.
Pardon?
The framework should drive that.
Correct.
Yeah. Through the chair, I think the recommendation around an internal audit was in respect of the delegation is an excellent idea, particularly in relation to the desire to rein in expenditure.
Sorry. Just because
David Papley has just made a recommendation around that in relation to Councillor Ryan's suggestion, and I think that's an excellent idea in the context of your efforts to improve budget. That it puts a focus on that.
so are you looking to have that included in the motion that's before us?
No, it's just a general comment.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Johnson.
I guess a couple of questions regarding this that are still pending. So asset revaluations and revenue accounting standards. I guess both of these are really important to us in terms of our current budget cycle. We've had some updates in our budget reviews around the way that grant revenue interest is allocated, and also we've had a change in depreciation values based on revaluation. So I guess just looking for a comment on the timing potentially of when those will be available for us to review.
Yeah, fair question. Both of those items are most diligently prepared and reviewed by the management team at the 30 June numbers. So we tend to hold off our work until we receive the most accurate version of numbers there. I'm not saying that you've got gross inaccuracies in the meantime. I don't know and I can't comment. But because we know that there is that hard close of year end, that's why we focused the review on those processes and controls, especially for grants, which, as no doubt you're aware, state and Fed throw money around quite flippantly in June. So we tend to focus our efforts then, just in case something slides in that we weren't aware of, and asset revaluations and the application of the assets. And, if it is a full condition assessment, we understand again, that can take quite a lot of time to process. And so we do look for that hard close at 30 June, and that's why we'll carry them to our final visit process.
And through the chair, I think a couple of my questions have been answered as far as discussion on the delays and efficiencies of the audit. I know it was raised last time. The other question, which I'm not sure whether Paula touched on or not in her discussion, is there was a couple of management response which says almost somewhat rejecting the auditor's recommendation, believing the current controls are adequate. I just would be interested to see what the auditor's views were on those particular responses.
Yeah, thank you. Just for clarity, is that the management response that's on page 21 of your pack in regards to the controls?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Again, it comes back to organisational appetite. We don't see a critical deficiency in the internal control framework as it currently stands, because there are enough supplementary controls. So keeping within our remit, is there a weakness, a material weakness under the Act? No. It's really about raising that these are what we would see as relatively typical controls in many organisations, and bring it to the committee's attention that if that detective control isn't in place, it creates a greater onus on the controls supplementing in the process. So the preventative and other higher level detective controls, as Matt alluded to before, such as the committee's review of quarterly budgets, for example, rather than looking at finances or as a custodian, you're actually a control element in that governance framework. And so it's bring to the committee's attention that really there are more focuses, or there is more reliance, should I say, on alternative controls to that reconciliation control process per se.
Would end up being this opinion that you might say was like a best practice improvement or something like that, or is it more than that?
It could be a difference in income. You can categorize it as that. And again, that's personal risk tolerance. Organizationally, you might have a tolerance to bypassing that step. That's not for us to say. And again, it comes back to, as you know, risk is part of your remit. If you're happy that the risks are being mitigated by the controls currently effective and in place, then that's fine by my book, which is why it's here as a matter for consideration and not a qualification.
Yep.
Thank you.
Andrew, you good?
Yep, all good. Thank you for that.
Okay. Well, we've got a motion on the table in front of us here. Simply that we note the report. Would someone like to move that motion? Yeah, Paula, thank you. And seconded. Councillor Yammans, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you.
Carried.
Carried, yep. Agenda item 7.2 is the external audit plan. That sort of thing. Let me just throw it once again. We're being asked to note the plan. And I'll just throw it open for discussion. Any questions?
Yeah, just can I ask a question on page 33, please, just of the report, assuming that the same under the report, but just wanting to just give me an explanation of that. You went through, there's an observation, and the result was a $39 million unidentified error in accumulated depreciation. So can you just put some words around that for me, please?
Yeah, sure. And I'll look to Matt for confirmation. This was last year, a matter that was identified last year, and it was identified and rectified last year. But we're raising it, and part of our risk consideration, we look back to look forwards, and just noting the fact that an error of that magnitude had occurred. It's certainly high on our radar to make sure that we have that critical look in that area again, to the same extent. So it's really assuring the committee that yes, it happened. I would imagine management would have implemented a control or some sort of review process to prevent it from happening again, I would hope. But when it comes to the year numbers, we will certainly be looking to ensure that we don't have a similar situation come through.
Is there anything the management would want to add to that comment? Because I do remember us going over all this.
Yes, so through the chair, we have implemented controls. One of the biggest changes that we have made is in terms of our timing of our revaluations, which will allow a longer period of time to be able to process adjustments, review, and have them sort of signed off before they go into the year-end financials. One of the issues we found last year end was there was quite a crunch with processing all of the revaluations, both from a system processing point of view, a timing of when we get the information back around revals. So the timing between when those adjustments were put through the system to when the auditors reviewed them, there was only a limited amount of time. So that opens up the risk of errors being made. That was identified as, that's not something that we want to continue exposing ourselves to. And we've therefore changed the timing of when we do our year-end revals to the 31st of December, which allows us, to really make sure that those numbers are in place and that we're very comfortable with them before at the end of the financial year.
Thanks, Jay. So
Just one.
yeah, sorry.
Just with regards to phase 3 of the ICT reform project, I think that has gone live in late April. Is that correct? So I guess, is that going, is it too early to jump in there and see how that's going in terms of whether it's doing what it was intended to do, or are we going to leave that for a little while before looking?
Yeah, fair question. It's something we can take on and consider with the management team. I'm not sure where they are in the process. The intent was to wait until later on. Knowing it was being implemented and going live this financial year is really where we were at. We didn't know the exact go live date. Perhaps, Jade, it's a conversation we can pick up later on and see if we can shift some time forward. That way, if there is anything we can early identify, but we'd have to look at our timing and scheduling. in enabling us to do so. But happy to take that conversation post meeting with the management team.
Okay,
Just one question through the chair. This document that's changed since it's dated March, so we know. Is there anything that has changed from the perspective of timelines? Is what I'm trying to say. You're not concerned around the things that you've set up? No, that's fine.
okay. Yep. So now we've got the recommendation in front of us that we note the 23-24 external audit plan received from Bentley's. That's all we're being asked to do is noted. Would someone like to move that?
Happy to, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Andrew. Seconded. Councillor Yeomans, thank you. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Thanks very much. Agenda item 7.3 is the quarterly finance report, including budget review number 3. And I note that the council management has presented us with a wealth of information here. So the question is how we propose, what's the best way of handling it? We can go through it as the pages appear, or we can just take it by exception. I'll just provide fair warning. I've got several questions, and I'm sure others have. So I'm in your hands. How would you like to proceed? We can, in other words, we can just do it with each member of the committee, right? And hopefully the rest other members are so attentive that the same question's not asked twice. Or we can just go through it page by page.
I don't have a huge number of questions on this item. You and Andrew know, though.
Yeah. Well,
We do anything later on this on the trust.
I don't have.
Chair, I'm quite happy to sit back and let you might cover off the lines.
Well, I mean, let's take it person by person. Councillor Pritchard, did you want to lead off?
Thanks, Chair. I was going to say I get confused by dates here. So I guess it was mostly potentially around the finance charges, and I can't remember if we've discussed these with relation to this budget review. Just noting there was a $784,000 increase, and I'm just trying to work out if that's one that we've discussed before, or if it's a new increase. It's probably the only real question.
So through the chair, there is an additional increase that has gone in as part of budget review 3. The reasons for that, or the predominant reasons for that, is a recalculation of deemed interest relating to grants received in advance. So we have an increased number of carry forwards into next financial year, a lot of that being funded. So there will still be an interest component that we need to recognise against that revenue in advance that is in addition to what was calculated at BR2, just because of the movements of timing of projects. The other element that has increased our finance costs is it is a reclassification from contract expenses, and that's in relation to the way that we need to account for operating leases under the leases standard for the Australian accounting standards. So at year end last year, we did an adjustment. So the way that we recognise our operating lease expenses is through basically a contracts line. The correct adjustment, there's some calculations around net present value. There's finance costs. There's like an amortization cost. We normally do that at year end because it is complicated to try to do each time you get an invoice to pay. But basically what that means is that we have put some money back into contractors and we've taken it off of finance costs. So we've reclassified where that expense is so that when year end comes, it's not such a big adjustment against the approved budget. No worries.
Andrew, did you have anything?
I didn't have a great deal because by looking at it, And I was more looking at the end of year forecast rather than year to date, etc. And by my looking at it, it's mainly the decrease in the depreciation, which has improved profit. Everything else has been somewhat matched out to each other. So it's certainly an improved financial position since the last budget review. What I couldn't readily find is what the estimated carry forwards were. I know they've said they've gone up by 1.2, but I couldn't recall what the total amount was, including what was put in for last budget review.
Through the chair, that's a fair point. I don't think we actually called out what the anticipated carry forwards into next financial year are, but they are gross carry forwards of roughly around $37 million, which is offset by about $15 million of income. The complete list of carry forwards and their actual amounts will come as part of the budget review for report in September.
Thank you for that. I knew there was some made in budget review too, but I just couldn't put my finger on it and saw they were increasing. Otherwise, I'm comfortable that there's been an improvement in the operating result. There's been an improvement in loans. Probably my question, I'll say for more the ESCOSA discussion about what next. Otherwise, I was reasonably comfortable to see the improvement in financial position.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, that probably segues into my main question, which really goes to the heart of whether the improved financial position is just because we're slow at spending the capital. And so my question would be, let's say we live in fantasy land in which we spend all the capital that we actually claim to spend. What was in the original budget? What would the operating result look like?
So through the chair, the impact of the operating result. So when we spend capital, the impact of the operating result comes from depreciation and finance costs on borrowings. The depreciation would come into play as the asset is capitalised, and the finance costs likewise would hit our P&L as that money was being spent. The impact on the current financial year, if we spend all of our capital, there would be some impact in the borrowings and in the depreciation, depending on the timing of when those were spent, but the bigger impact would actually be recognised in the next financial year.
But that's because of the capitalisation. So why don't we turn to the cash flow? Mm-hmm. What would the impact on the year-end cash flow be?
Let me just, if I can just take a moment, I'll have a look at that.
Sure. Thanks, Jade. I think
likely be a significant increase in loans, I suspect.
Yeah, but yeah, that's right. But so you're taking the proceeds from the loans as reducing the capital, the cash. Yeah.
So through the chair,
increasing the cash and reducing the cash flow impact. Yeah.
So through the chair, the borrowings forecast at the end of this report is, I think, is $111 million, and that's assuming around $20 million net carry forwards into the next financial year. So if we were to actually spend all of that, our borrowings would then be sitting at about $131 million.
Yeah. Okay. So, but that's the balance sheet impact. I'm trying to get a sense of how much of the improvement is attributable to simply going slowly on spending capital, and how much of it's real.
No, I think you find most of the operating results improve because of the depreciation adjustment worth about $2 million.
Yeah, I get that, but when there's year after year after year, then sooner or later, you've either, you know my view on this, you've either got to come to grips with what you're capable of spending, or just wait for the day when you actually do spend it.
So through the chair, to be able to provide a more accurate information, we would need to sort of model that out to look at what would the impact be. As I mentioned, the timing of when projects are completed and delivered will impact on what that operating impact would be. I mean, if you capitalise all of your completed projects, if you finish all your completed projects in June, there's minimal impact to your operating position for that financial year versus if we were to finish them, you know, in April, for example.
Just to show my age, there used to be a thing called source and application of funds. That statement seems to have gone out of fashion these days. I don't see it anymore. I just wonder if we did a source and application of funds, whether it might not show the position a bit more clearly. But that's just an old man talking, really. I just think it's important to capture the actual position on this thing, because the more people that understand the actual position, the better. And the contribution that is being made every year by underspending the capital budget is very material, and potentially, in my view, distorts the picture.
Through the chair, if the carry forwards don't vary significantly from one year to the next, then really there's no impact on the numbers or the bottom line. And if I think to Jade's earlier numbers around, I think it was it $37 million in carry forwards, less 15 in revenue, that's net 22 million. If we assume 6% interest rate, and for the whole 12 months, that would be about $1.3 million. So obviously the number would be far less than that, because we wouldn't have spent the 22 by July 1st. So I think even if we had spent that entire additional $22 million, our position would only be a few $100,000 worse than what it is that we're presenting today through that interest expense line.
Yeah, right. I think that's right. I accept the point that if the carry forward's the same, then there's no impact. But I do question the practice of budgeting to spend money that you know you're not going to spend. So let's deal with me. A couple of stupid questions here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we've been through this before, but I just want to make sure I'm on the right thing here. Grant revenue that is received for renewal infrastructure is required to be recognised in the operating position, with expenditure recognised as capital. So grant revenue is recognised as income, and the expenditure is not recognised, except in the capital statement.
Through the chair, that's correct.
But we do spend the money
Yes.
in the operating, and then some of it ends up being booked as capital, correct?
So we recognise the income in our operating statement, in our income. The expenditure we recognise through the balance sheet as a work in progress. So it's basically a non-current asset.
But I thought as we spend, you know, if we're getting some gravel for a road or something, that gets charged to the operating and then gets capitalised.
No, it would go straight into the balance sheet.
Okay. So dollars were funded into mirrors there. Yeah, that's fine. Project expenses, yeah. Well, return to David's point. Are we getting any better at spending this money? The answer is no.
Right. Matt Buckle, Manager Construction and Projects. So sort of waiting for an opportune time perhaps to feed into some of what's going on the carry forward front. So we're in the midst of a pretty unusual period of time at the moment, with quite a number of large projects that are predominantly, or a large portion of the funding is external funding we've received to deliver. So that makes up the far majority of our carry forwards at the moment. The majority of these are being paid upfront, particularly by the state government, and we enter a funding agreement for a period of time to deliver them that extends beyond our annual budget process and council's budget cycles. So we're very aware at the point in time at which we enter those agreements that they will extend beyond the end of the financial year, and we do our best to report, project, and let people know about projected carry forwards around that. Examples of that are things like Hopwood Theatre got a $6 million grant from the state government to deliver that project, which will take an extended period of time to deliver, and we go in eyes open about that, into agreements and negotiate and work with the state on that. We've also received through the state election commitments money for 21 intersection upgrades down in McLaren Vale, Paul Murray Recreation Centres, Aldinga and Wollonga Cycleways, community centre extensions. All of these were grants that were provided to the council with a minimum 2-year timeframe to deliver. And accepting that, we advised the state that some of those would extend beyond the 2-year timeframe. So things like the 21 intersections that we're in the process of upgrading require land acquisitions. They require us to work with the state government on approval of drawings, utilities on augmentation of services and the like. So we've known that they would take longer periods of time. The state's will was to provide that money upfront, which we've received, and we manage and report through these processes. So there are a very large number, and the income reflects that. A number of those projects are also part funded by the City of Onkaparinga, which accounts for some of the matching funds or other contributions that we're contributing to those projects. So it's a unique period of time where we have so many of those things. We're very successful through our state and federal government advocacy projects and program. And so they account for the large proportion. There is a very low number of renewal projects that are within the projected carry forwards at the moment. And some of those relate to unforeseen processes that required external approvals. So we have a road intersection we're trying to upgrade, Pickett Range Road and Eastern Road, that required some native veg approval. That was refused. We've been negotiating with the state government. We recently granted approval for that. That's an extended period of time that project was delayed, that was unforeseeable. So we understand development approval processes, land acquisition timeframes, but they don't always go to the best plans. And occasionally we have a refusal, but that project is important enough that we continue to persevere, because in that case, it's a black spot funded project. People are dying and there are injuries in that intersection. And so we persevere, continue to work with the state agencies and the approval process to try and achieve the optimum outcome for our community. So I don't know that it's necessarily always the case that we aren't aware. More often than not, we are aware that they will be carry forwards. We projected some of these at a BR1 report, a number of them, particularly the state and federally funded projects. So you have your views on the treasury management processes, but I think we are very open and honest about being aware of where these projects might fall and lie, and work with the state and deliver in accordance with the funding agreements that we have in place with those parties. So.
Sure, thank you. I guess that raises a couple of points for me. First is, I'm in no doubt that you are working as hard as you can to progress these projects. I wonder about whether you got the cattle that you need. I know a little bit about these things. 21 intersections. It doesn't matter whether they're big or small in terms of the internal management resources and so on, but you need pretty much the same for every intersection. So I wonder whether the carryovers are not reflecting you guys being stretched, to the point where, land acquisition, sure, they take time, but someone's also got to prepare the documentation and so on. And in an ideal world, you'd have all of that happening contemporaneously with people preparing all those things. So if you're stretched, then you're going to be doing it sequentially. And so the question is, how much can you chew? How much can you bite off?
Yeah. And I guess I respond to that by saying that we're resourcing in accord with the funding agreements and the requirements to deliver to the state and federal government. So we know we have a 2-year window or a 3-year window to deliver a project. That's what we've agreed to. And so we're resourcing with the priority focused on the 6 months to 12-month timeframe horizon agreements that we must deliver on. Yeah. And some of the others we have more time, so we're allowing ourselves more time, and that's about our own internal resource management or consultant or contractor management, so that we don't have the ability to upscale to a $25 million state or federal government election commitment outcome. So we
are trying to be pragmatic in our management of that. We are, has been a particularly peak period of pressure resource wise, but we are trying to work through that and prioritise, and we have deferred some of our capital programs. So that is a practice we have undertaken internally through our capital programs as well. So we reduced some of our renewal programs over the last couple of years to make sure that we weren't, we're focused on where we had commitments outside of the building into community as well.
The problem of living marginal electorate land. You have a sort of KPI about keeping the carryover the same as it was the year before?
So I guess I'd answer that by saying it's difficult. If we entered the financial year in our budget process knowing that we were going to carry forward 30 million to deliver state and federal projects, would we manage that differently? I guess it's a known factor that we're I guess eyes open about needing to manage that. So
perhaps I can just add to Matt's comment. So carry forward as a KPI, it's pretty common, but what we have to do is be able to strip out some of the anomalies, particularly around state and federal funding, because that is the sort of outlier, if you like. But typically, like governments, we might go, well, for our renewal program as a measure, and we've been talking about this previously, to say, well, the things that are within our control that we plan, that is council money, the community should expect that we're delivering them against those. So that's where you set your KPI around the council renewal type program, because that's the ongoing. The state and federals is, as we heard earlier from the auditor, they've got to check those come May and June, because that's just typically how funds received when the state and the federal governments are confident on their numbers. They then have other organisations we carry those forwards. But if you take that equation out, then I certainly think the KPI around our renewal and council funded projects is something that we should be doing.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That segues nicely into the second point, which probably isn't for Matt, and that is I've expressed some reservations about the advocacy program before, given that the ratepayers end up having to fund it in the form of increased depreciation charges whenever you're successful. Is there any how do we take that into account in approaching state and federal governments? I mean, I think we talked about a basketball stadium or a swimming pool. Oh, sorry, gymnastics. Yeah, and great thing to have, and all the rest of it, but there has to be a recognition that then becomes a cost pressure for every ratepayer. And I just wonder how we balance those things when we in our advocacy program.
So this time around in our advocacy preparations, we've had a bit of emphasis on our forward renewal program and making sure we're feeding into the program and some of our advocacy priorities around things that are already projects we've identified within our short-term horizon, and with the aim that we can hopefully secure funding from the state or federal government towards things that are current liabilities that we need to address in the forward works.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really true. It's a great question. It's a pretty one for local governments. It's a really tough balancing act, particularly for our elected members, because the community also expects that we go out and seek funding. So we're always doing this dance between trying to keep our finances under control and being advocate for the community for projects that they value. Been like a long time. I think there's an answer to that one, because I think if we weren't advocating, the elected members of the community would be very disappointed in us, and it puts us under some financial pressures. So, to Matt's point, I think the balance there is to try and advocate things that we know are needed based on evidence, based on our forward plans and our strategies, and then trying to push back against the ones that left field that were just nice presence.
You can do something radical and make the direct beneficiaries pay the depreciation, instead of smearing the charges across every ratepayer. That'd be for the elected members, though. So sorry to belabor these things. Jade, I've got one last question, a really stupid one. On page 74, now we're doing statement of cash flows for the year ending 30 June. We've got the third last lines, cash and cash equivalents at beginning of reporting period and we've got dashes, does that mean we had no cash?
So through the chair, based on the budget and the way that we cash flow, it was assumed that the cash at bank was nil because all the available cash was going into borrowings. That's the assumption that's sort of underlying the budget and those forecasts.
Right, so that should be a zero, not a dash.
Correct.
All right, well, we've got, sorry, has anybody got any further thoughts?
Just ask a couple of quick ones if I can. The forecast, and I take it this is the third quarter, but we're sort of halfway through the fourth quarter now. So we're still looking at a deficit at the end of the year. You know, I can see what you've got here. Just wondering whether things might have improved in the last.
Through the chair, no, we are still looking at a deficit position for 30 June 2023, and hopefully that is the last one that we have.
And Jay, if I can just look at the debt servicing ratio, it started off at 3%, it's 3.6, it's gone up to 4%. So is that because of the impact on interest rates or increasing borrowings?
Is it because of the increase in interest costs?
Interest rates, yeah. Just lastly, Jay, if I can, just on the same page 80, there's the asset renewal funding ratio. It's going down. Is that a good trend?
Through the chair, no, technically the asset renewal funding ratio should be between 90 and 110%. However, because of all the state and federal funding that we've been receiving, there has been more of an emphasis over the last year on new as opposed to renewal. So while no, that is not a trend we would want to see continue, it's not unexpected and there is some context around that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that goes to that issue that we've raised here before, is whether if it's not between 90 and 100%, is that the fault of the numerator or the fault of the denominator? And I'm hoping that we can have a good discussion about that when we look at the long-term financial plan. Something that seemed to have escaped us being recorded. Anyway, okay. If there's no more comment, we've got a motion in front of us that we review and discuss. No? Seems fun to have a motion for something we've already done, but anyway, someone like to move it? Councillor Young, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Carried. Sorry, Andrew, I missed that little hand of yours.
No problems.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thanks, Matt. So our next agenda item is the ESCOSA Strategic Management Plan Advice Scheme. Now, the Audit and Risk Committee reviewed the advices provided by ESCOSA, the responses to the advices included in the annual business plan and provided feedback. So I propose that we deal with the last part of that first. Do we have feedback?
Just a question to start with. Do we know if other councils have provided feedback to ESCOSA in the form of a letter or anything? Or is this something that we're attempting to do? Or are we just proposing to put it in a business plan as a response?
Through the Chair, Councillor, there's no formal requirement to respond to ESCOSA. It is ESCOSA's report. There is probably a further discussion for the ARC today as to whether you'd like to write to ESCOSA. We know that the Chair and the committee has previously provided advice to the Council and its deliberations around the budget. And what we've tried to do in this paper is outline, I guess, ESCOSA's recommendations, so there's their recommendations, and how that's reflected in the budget that's out for community consultation. But certainly there's no requirement to, however, it doesn't stop, in my view, a council from writing or asking specifically to ESCOSA if it wishes to do so.
Just in response, I was going to say that I think there's potentially some advocacy opportunities in responding to ESCOSA, particularly I've identified the recommendation 9, which is around the asset surplus assets, given the difficulty we have in asset relocation, then I think if we're highlighting that through the ESCOSA, then that's possibly if we want to propose to do those things going forward. So that's page 84.
Just bear with me.
Does Andrew want to talk? Tim?
I'm sorry.
I think Andrew wants to talk.
Oh, Andrew, please.
Yeah, mine was a comment or a question to start with. That all the management responses, which is unsurprising, are all says they'll be fixed in the long-term financial plan. So my question, which is right, my question is, according to the reports later on, we probably won't see the long-term financial plan until April next year. Is that correct?
So through the chair, we're required to have our long-term financial plan adopted by November this financial year. And we are just working through the timing currently of when that will come to the Audit and Risk Committee and to the chamber. But it will certainly for next year.
Yeah, no, that was just going, I think the audit plan later on had it as April. So just given it, I think fundamentally drives a lot of the responses, and obviously the follow-on item is the strategic asset management plan will probably need to be reviewed in light of what you can actually fund through the long-term financial plan. So yeah, my question is around clarity on timing. I think that underwrites a lot of the issues that the chair raised in the last item, as well as the ESCOSA report, as well as a couple of other issues in today's paper.
So through the chair, the strategic asset management plan is also being reviewed in line with the review of the long-term financial plan. And the intent is that they will come together to both the Audit and Risk Committee and to the long-term financial plan. Because to your point, Andrew, and to Tim's point, the two go hand in hand. The SAMP is a huge impact into the long-term financial plan. So they will be coming to you in the coming months.
Great. That sounds good. Is there anything else?
Just on recommendation 14, which is around, I would be too simplistic in it's tying revenue increases or rate increases to a single measure of inflation, which is what the recommendation is around. But we've identified that there are cost pressures outside of inflation, and our response is sort of just limiting it to rate increases with regards to CPI, but at the same time, we've had a lot of cost increases other than just inflationary pressures, additional cybersecurity requirements and security requirements. So I just wanted to know whether we should be putting more into that response rather than maintaining that almost one-to-one relationship.
You might just take a step back and come back to that. Would you mind? Because the first sentence troubles me a bit. As council focus on budget repair, there will be need to increase rates above inflation in the immediate term. And we know that that's happened for the forthcoming budget, but I'll remove the arc that the paper said if that rise was approved, there would be no need for any rises beyond CPI subsequent to that for the foreseeable future. And I just wonder whether we're doing ourselves a disservice by not adding that to that comment.
Through the chair, publicly, because we've had a lot of feedback to the community, I've actually put a statement to that effect to the public to say that this is a once-off budget repair and that our modelling suggests we remain in surplus for the foreseeable future based on the CPI increase. That's in the public domain already. It's not in this paper, but it's certainly in the public domain.
I wonder, just as a bit of insurance, well, it might be worth just adding to that little box, because I could see how someone who wanted to could use an unqualified statement like that to say, well, what's immediate? It could be 5 years. So it's just that's a thought. So, Councillor Pritchard, can I hand over to you now to take it further? This question about what's the correct escalator here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just conscious. I mean, yeah, how do we break the cycle of inflation and revenue being linked? External to this, we're trying to raise revenue with different strong revenue rates. So potentially we only increase rates by CPI, and then any additional revenue that we need to generate to maintain services that cost more than CPI. We have to come from there or something. I'm just conscious that we're keeping the rhetoric between inflation and revenue as almost a one. I read it as almost a one-to-one relationship, which is, I think there's a lot more behind that. I'm not sure how we actually discuss that in detail, but there's a lot of services that are going up beyond that. And so if we want to maintain those services, then the revenue has to increase beyond CPI.
You might limit yourself from parking fining fees to CPI, to take one example. Yeah. I guess, can I put it this way? Is CPI the benchmark here? I mean, you know, it mightn't be the right in escalator, but it's what everyone's going to hold you to anyway. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's I don't know if you've been following it, this thing about HEX fees, for instance. They're absolutely right. They shouldn't be being indexed on what's happening to petrol prices. But you know, that's the way people think.
I always took the view, and it gets back to why I'm so craving for a long-term financial plan, that the council can justify, given what it's delivering and the services providing councils, and the community's accepted of above CPI increase. I don't see an issue with it. But at this stage, while I do take the CEO's comments on board that their modelling says they can, we obviously haven't seen anything that gives us an opinion that it should or shouldn't be above CPI. So I'm not objecting to above CPI. I just want to see the benefit for ratepayers, and how that's factored in. Because I've got some comments on the next item about community expectations increasing significantly, and CPI only lets you do what you did yesterday with a bit of a cost increase, whereas people don't want what they had yesterday. They want improvements, and I suspect council through its infrastructure are seeing significant changes in what they used to be delivering to what they're delivering now. You know, take the old football change rooms back 10 or 15 years ago compared to the requirements in today. There's significant changes, and which come with significant costs, which CPI doesn't account for.
Well, there's that, isn't there? But then there's the other thing in our case, there's some catch up for past profligacy as well.
Yep. Which is where I think the long-term financial plan will tell the story of where council's at, where it's going, why it needs to make certain decisions, and why it can and can't do certain projects.
Yep.
Yeah, just on that, I think, whilst just going back to the earlier comment about the nature of our response, whilst there not be an obligation, and I've certainly seen there's each council I've been associated with had a very different view of these reports and how they've responded to them. I also think it's an opportunity that we shouldn't, like, despite it not being a wonderful report, it's an opportunity, you know, never lose, what is it, never lose the opportunity. It's like, there's stuff there to use, and make sure that what you're crafting in your response is actually consistent, and you're not setting yourself up for in 6 months' time or whenever it is that we look at this, where we go, well, we promised this in that, and we said the LTFP was going to solve all this, and it doesn't. So I'm more concerned around getting the messaging right, however you do it, whether you do it this way or in direct engagement. I mean, I think Adelaide got them in before they had the report and got them in about a year before and had a completely different relationship, whereas say Salisbury was probably the other extreme. So it's about using this to the advantage to try and put the brakes on in the future rather than going, oh, yeah, we're on that, we're all across that. Yeah, but what happens in 6 months when as all those things that Andrew just talked about come on board? I think you can use this report much more effectively. However you do it, you can use it in a way that can actually help you do the very things, even if you think it wasn't useful and it because you knew it all anyway, it's out there now. So use this as an opportunity to craft a narrative and be consistent.
Yeah, through that report, I 110% agree with you. With a waste of good crisis. The ESCOSA report is in good reading. However, in our narrative to the public, particularly around the budget that's in the public domain, we lean very heavily on the fact that this has been an independent assessment. Whether we agree or not, it's probably going to be a bit futile because we'll be seen in that light that it's, we're being defensive. So we'll leverage that with the Chamber as best we can, also with the Chamber. I mean, a lot of the members of here will know that we spoke about ESCOSA report at length and the need for that. We've actually implemented a lot of things that recommendations to our advantage to try to broaden that revenue base. So specifically, if you look at recommendation 5, and you actually look at the things that we're hearing from the community, we've broadened the revenue base. You may read some commentary about mattresses and cars on beaches and all of those. Those are all deliberately reflecting back ESCOSA's recommendations to diversify the revenue base. We'll try to do it, and we'll try to do it once so the community understands and they can see that actually we get to a financially sound position. Our indicators, based on the draft budget, have us highlighted all green across all those metrics. So to our point, we've tried to leverage this option as best we can to do it properly, do it once, and do it early.
As well as, I know that recommendation 5 talked about increasing, opportunities to increase the revenue, but I also think going hand in hand is looking at opportunities to reduce expenditure. And to be honest with you, I think that's the big ticket item. And that's just so the ARC's aware, that's sort of aligned with a council meeting notice of motion that was carried back in February, where I asked for an updated register of services that we're providing, including the costs associated with those services, but importantly, looking for opportunities where we might be providing services that we no longer need to be providing because it's been overtaken by other non-government NGOs, non-for-profit organisations, also looking at those and providing those services. So what might have been provided initially as a need to have, that might just be a supplementary to what else is going on around the place. And the council really hasn't had a good picture of that in recent times. So I'm hopeful when we see that report back in August, there might be some commentary there with some opportunities to identify, why are we doing this? Why are we continually to fund this sort of these services when other agencies either should be or are doing them? So that's sort of part of that process, I think, as well as looking for opportunities to increase revenue. That's all well and good, but I think we also need to look in-house as well as what we're spending our money on.
Thanks, Councillor. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I'm happy to respond to that. I mean, as a government, we're always going to have to look for efficiencies, so I acknowledge that. I also think the services that we provide, we had to do a workshop, and I acknowledge it was probably a high-level workshop around policy settings and our service levels. I think we can really look at that. There's no black or white answer like government about what services you should go, because actually it's a whole range of services that if we chose purely as a financial lens, we would be libraries, sporting clubs, and all very critical for the community. So it's a fine balance, but I acknowledge Councillor Young's desire to review the costs. I will also say that the costs that we put out to the community has us increasing overall costs by less than CPI. So there is some pressure already, but acknowledging that that's always subject to review and changes from time to time. We'll review depending on the revenue chamber.
what their views are on particular services for council, and I'm very happy to do that. We need to do that in a very considered, make sure that we have all the information available to us to make that in an informed way, to make sure that that can be delivered. So yes, and I take on to that point. We've tried to do what we can in the period we've got, but absolutely happy to have that conversation continue.
Thanks, Phil. If there being no further discussion, we've got oh no, actually, let's return to the point. Is there any discussion on the original point? So any discussion? Does the committee have a view on actually supplying this response to ESCOSA, notwithstanding the advice that we have no obligation to do so?
Through the chair, I've seen a variety of ways and means, and really I think it's a management decision as to the most effective way. I don't think there's anything that, I mean, we have a different view, but I don't have a view about the ARC particularly.
Yeah.
It varies enormously, and really it depends on the nature of the report and how he's engaged.
Through the chair, I'm trying to pass some hot potato here. Management's ability to critique ESCOSA, I think, in the public domain will receive through a certain lens, because it's a critique of management effectively. I think the ARC with independent members with freely would actually be a much more powerful machine to be done an assessment of ESCOSA's advice if you're able to do that. And sorry to pass the.
Did you just feel that microphone on your?
No, I'm also thinking there's two advices. There's this one, and of course, there's the one I wrote in a personal capacity. I know Adam Wilson well. I have no difficulty if he sees it, but perhaps it shouldn't come to him through some official channel for the reasons that Phil's just said. But if he was just to get a email, maybe I'll send it to him myself. I don't know.
I suppose looking more broadly from my view, that I'm comfortable with management's response to ESCOSA's recommendation, and it all is based on long-term financial plan. I'm comfortable with the recommendations that ESCOSA have made in their analysis of the financial state, because we've commented on that before. And as far as, I suppose, holistic response back to the council on the ESCOSA, is we're really reiterating the comments that you provided, Mr. Chair, back to council based on the budget that we provided, that there is a need for budget repair, there is a need for the long-term financial plan, there is a need for a debt reduction strategy, and reiterate all those stuff that you mentioned after our last meeting is probably where I see us going with this item.
Yeah, that's right. So help me out, Andrew. How does that translate into an action?
It's really the Audit and Risk Committee notes the advice from ESCOSA, which reflects the Audit and Risk Committee's view of the council's finances. The Audit and Risk Committee reiterate its advice provided to council in relation to its 2004-2005 budget, being the need for completion of a long-term financial plan and a debt reduction strategy.
Hang on, Sarah.
Yeah. Just give us 1 second here for a long-term financial plan.
See where we've got to.
Just
You can see that.
yeah, but
Being the need for a updated long-term financial plan and a debt reduction strategy. The two might be one and the same.
yeah.
And the Audit and Risk Committee endorsed the response the management response to the ESCOSA report, assumingly everyone's in agreement with those responses.
Yeah, I am the possible minor exceptions that suggesting that sentence should be added to the comment about needing to have rate increases in excess of CPI. Because in the wrong hands, I think that that's capable of being misinterpreted. But
is it the fact the Audit and Risk Committee? I'm trying to tie it back to the long-term financial plan because that's where the rate increases will be considered or put forward. If that makes sense.
You could do it in a more positive way, couldn't you? So keep all those words, right? Rather than making an updated financial plan and debt reduction strategy, right? And notes that and notes after strategy, and notes that the plan includes provision for avoiding rate increases above CPI after 2024-25. Happy with that, Andrew?
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. So we've got a new motion in front of us. Do you have any comment on that motion? Any part of it?
I'm happy to move it. So the typo in the first ESCOSA lowercase a, you might want to fix.
Can I check with you, Chair, just the end outcome of this? Will a letter go from BARC to ESCOSA, or do you just want to note it on this?
No, that's a good point, because if the letter's going to come from us, it should form part of this resolution. What do people think? I'm happy to. Yeah. Well, what if we do something like this? And notes, so the draft letter would be circulated for the ARC to forward the response to the ESCOSA report. Yeah.
It's just one more thing, Chair. Is it worth making note too that the ARC did provide advice to council in relation to this?
Yeah, let's just think. What if we look at the first sentence there? I think we can deal with this quite easily. It says that the ARC notes the advice from ESCOSA, which reflects the ARC's view of council's finances as advised to council previously. So right? All right. Are we there?
Through the chair, Andrew, can you see the recommendations? No, Andrew?
Yep, I'm happy with the recommendation. Yep.
Okay.
I'm happy to second it.
Okay, I'll move it.
Okay. Thank you. Move Paul, seconded Andrew. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Thanks for that. That's good. That's good. All right, 7.5. There's federal government inquiry. We've got the submission in front of us. And I guess the question here is, sorry, I'll just go back to my notes. here in front of us. Is that we note the report. And provide the following feedback. So is there anything anyone would like to contribute to that feedback?
Through the chair, is this a draft letter or is it gone? I'm just trying to clarify what sort of feedback would be useful.
My understanding is it's the former. Please,
Yes, through the chair, this is the draft letter that will go to council for consideration and it's due to be submitted by the end of May.
So I assume that there's some prospect or risk, depending on which way you look at it, of having to appear as, once you lodge these letters, sometimes you have to appear as witnesses before them.
Through the chair, I've never been called as a witness to Senate or the inquiry before. I think there'll be a lot of councils making submissions on this, and certainly ALGA have quite a campaign to encourage as many councils as possible to make submissions.
I just wanted to make an observation that the paragraph about what works well is extraordinarily brief.
Yeah, that's an excellent report. That's a fair comment, and I think the majority of the councils are preparing inquiries of the criticisms, not the positives. So we thought it might be nice to point out the things that work as well.
Through the chair, and it's such a small section, it almost draws attention to the opposite, but fair point.
So well, maybe we can move it to the beginning so it starts nicely and
sandwich.
My thought to your comment about there will be lots of councils. We have some specific things here, and I wonder whether. Yeah, I mean, the report's well written, the evidence is good and all the rest of it. But I wonder whether there's not a couple of ways of differentiating ourselves. Yes, obviously one of the country's growth hotspots, and that's been recognised by state and federal governments. But sometimes the strains that creates, as we've heard from Matt earlier today, we've known previously, that imposes particular pressures on local councils, both with their management and with their finances. Because one thing I'll absolutely bet you is that no member of this committee understands the depreciation thing. So in effect, we get a grant from the federal government and our ratepayers have to pay off the maintenance in the form of increased depreciation charges. It'd be interesting to take a project into NPV, the grant versus the annual maintenance charges over 20 or 30 years, and see if we actually are in front. Because I bet there's some projects where we're not. And I just suspect, without knowing every council area in Australia, but knowing the ones in Adelaide reasonably well, my guess is that we'd probably suffer from this more than any other single council. So I just wondered if you thought there was something to be said for separating ourselves from the ruck a bit.
Through the chair, I don't know if we'd have the capacity to do that kind of modelling in time for this submission. In terms of differentiating us as a council, there is a little bit in there that is unique to us in that we're the only council in South Australia that has 2 landscape boards, which means that there's some extra administrative costs for us because they're the way we collect that levy is different. And I think it could be challenging to do what you're suggesting in terms of looking at the modelling for this submission.
Chair, if I could just add to that, I guess my view would be that this is a submission to an inquiry, which is obviously Australia-wide. The more high-level things that by the inquiry is probably going to give weight to, right behind the numbers if councils are uniform. So a lot of the points here you find are pretty generic that apply, the FAGS grants and those sorts of things, with a view to trying to elevate those big issues for the sector as a whole. I think with the number of submissions that we've received across, there's probably 500 councils across Australia, then the number of them responding to a council is probably going to be a little bit more constrained. I think it will actually be, if they pick up themes across the sector, what might be useful. And I think that's how we've sort of positioned the paper at that sort of higher strategic level.
Yeah, I'd have to sort of inject a personal view into that, having sat on officials, committees of state and federal government, is that the point you make about the general things is right, but it can become very anodyne and very easy to dismiss. I wouldn't have thought the modelling was that hard. If you found one project, Judge, you could just take the depreciation schedules and pretend that was the actual cash cost and do an NPC on it. And you're pretty, one where it's negative. And as I say, they might take some interest in you.
Bridget Harris as the words person and not the numbers person. I'll have to defer to this.
I think the chair's point, I think it's probably less about just the curriculum people calculation, but the fundamental principle we're saying is when local governments are given funding, that there is no funding of the ongoing operating and maintenance costs attached to that funding, which means that the burden is on the ratepayer in the long term.
And I don't think there's any understanding of how the charges compare with the value of the original grant. I mean, if you ask most people in local government, they'd probably think, it's 5 or 10% or something, but it's not. And sometimes, you take it, as I say, the net present cost, sometimes it's greater than the value of the grant. So you're better off actually not accepting it.
The main one for South Australian local governments at the moment around assets is jetties. That's 1%, and that's probably
that's a good example. It was state government that transferred the jetties over to local government, not the federal government, wasn't it? But it's a good example.
I think a good example too of what you're trying to say, Chair, is it was the Prudential report in relation to the Witten Bluff project where that was co-funded, but the costs have grown out significantly. But when we actually then drill down to the future costs to this council, they are significant. And I can guarantee you people just aren't aware of that unless they go into read a council report and look at the Prudential report and try and understand the numbers.
And there's a bit of moral hazard here. It's great to get the headlines and accept the grant. You're not going to be on council in 20 years when you're still paying the maintenance. So it's a structural problem as well.
As I mentioned before, probably the underlying issue is that's probably not touched on submission is the changing in community expectations and the rapid growth, because that's why you're applying for the grant in the first place and why you're stuck with the costs is I think as discussed earlier, the communities are harassing you politically to have these projects, to provide these facilities, and their expectations are growing as to what they want, and a modern rec centre is totally different to a previous rec centre, but councils lack the revenue to undertake those projects, and fundamentally they're reliant on rates because they have no growth tax access, unlike the state and federal government. That's probably I see as a missing bit about community expectations.
Through the chair, that's a fair point, and I think we could incorporate something along those lines in the submission, definitely.
I know what I'd be doing if I was sitting on that committee. I'd be asking why South Australia's got so many councils. Sorry, Councillor Pritchard, that's your turn.
So just a specific point. Key point number 1 includes this request for a once-off payment of $3 billion to address the historical practice of paying FA grants to councils in advance. I don't understand that point really at all, and it's our first big point. So I just wonder if there's a comment or anything.
Through the chair, that is in relation to the federal assistance grants not being indexed for, I can't remember how many years, but they've basically calculated and said that should be fixed and it should be paid retrospectively, which would equate to that amount in federal assistance grants.
So you're saying they will understand that point? Yeah, okay.
The other points I had around the actual report is there's a number of the services that we're delivering. I guess probably there's an opportunity, I guess, to highlight some of the other costs that have increased. So we talk about the asset and infrastructure costs with regards to roads. Is there any sort of climate related costs or anything like that we could be adding in there that just to highlight that there are, cost of council is increasing beyond just assets?
Actually, that's a good point. I imagine that the performance of the Grants Commission will be form part of these deliberations. And its formulae for allocating things. Are we happy with that?
There's a point there around, I think, the financial assistance grants. There's two components. There's a sector like government. I think we're all holding hands saying we should get a greater share of the pie. I think once you get beyond that, there's probably different views from regionals and metros and others about how that pie is split up in the formula around that. So I think that second piece is probably the next step should the pie overall increase. The first step is really to try to get a percentage of a greater share of taxation overall. That's how we've grafted the paper at this point.
Yeah. So let's try and tie this together. What feedback are we going to provide here? Well, first of all, I would suggest that the ARC is strongly supportive of the submission. Yeah, that's point number one. What additional points?
I don't know how to summarise that last item, but encourages the inclusion of the bird aspect that you were, sorry, not the aspect that you were referring to, the issue around future burden.
Yep. So we've said that we've complained about getting grants.
Exploration,
but asks something like the comment about maintenance be strengthened by referring to City of Onkaparinga's particular, I'm trying not to use the word unique, but specific circumstances.
Is it a sentence around consideration of whole of life costing in the issuing of grants?
That's really well put.
Not specific to Onkaparinga.
Correct.
No.
So there's that, and then there's anything that's specific that we're not addressing.
Yeah, well, as
two different.
As a council that's active,
Yeah,
very active in receiving grants.
Yeah.
Comment about as the council's active in receiving grants, that
so that's an undue burden on us, but it's a burden on all.
That's right. It wants to stress the importance of getting whole of life financial support for projects. Yeah, okay. But can I just suggest there that second point have a preface to it that says something about as a council that experiences particularly high activity in this area of grant implementation, you know, the council encourages the committee to include, the committee to give full consideration to whole of life. Yeah. Yeah, to the inclusion of whole of life. Well, would someone like to move? No, thanks, Paul. Seconded. Thanks, Councillor Yeomans. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Okay, our next budget item is thanks, Innes. Our next budget item is the internal audit quarterly update. Nicole?
Through the chair, happy for it to be taken as read unless there's any specific information.
That's good. Good report. Okay, let me just we've been asked to note this. Is there just the usual drill? Is there anything anyone wants to raise in particular here?
Through the chair, I can just add that there's we're tracking well on the internal audits.
I'm sorry?
We're tracking well with the internal audits and with the internal audit actions. There's only 6 outstanding, 4 relating to the ICT project 3 and 2 relating to procurement procedure.
Okay.
Just a quick question. Now that ICT project 3 has been implemented, do we have an updated time frame on those outstanding ones potentially?
Through the chair, we'll have to take that question on notice, Councillor, and we'll report back on that.
Any other discussion? Would someone like to move the motion that's in front of us?
Happy to, Mr. Chair.
Secondly, we'll put you down as the second, Andrew, if that's all right.
Yep, no problems.
A little bit of delay from back at your end. All those in favour? Gary, thank you. Thanks, Nicole. Now, that brings us to item 7.7, corporate governance third quarter. We'll just ask to receive a note, the report. Is there any discussion?
It's all right.
What's the difference?
Oh, no? No? Oh, yeah.
It's more of a query rather than I'm just curious about the artificial intelligence item, and I can't remember whether I've asked this before, so please forgive me if I have, but do you have like a framework, do you have like a framework or policy around this? Is this the first stage or, you know, I know it's dealt with varying ways and it's something I'm particularly interested in at the moment, so I'm just wondering where you're at, maturity.
Through the chair, we currently have a working group that's been put together. A draft policy has been established, and from the working group input that then will go to DG for review and then to ARC for comment as well, if you'd like.
Thank you.
Is this a sort of an operational policy within the organisation, or is it more around trying to set some standards or a bit of both?
It is high level, just saying how we use AI and what opportunities there are, but not going into the detail of operational really.
And presumably risks as well.
Yes. Yeah, particularly with OpenAI.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I should indicate City of Holdfast Bay. Is that one you've looked at? Yeah, I've obviously seen it. It's quite useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So any other discussion? Okay, what's before us is that we receive and note the agenda report. For proposer. Yeah, Councillor Pritchard, thanks. Seconder. Paula, thank you. All those in favour? Carried, thank you. So our next agenda item is the corporate risk review. And here we're being asked to receive and note the report and note that the risks identified in the report will be monitored and reported to the NARC in accordance with our work plan. It's pretty straightforward, I guess. Is there any discussion?
Through the chair, we have tried to reduce this report down, just taking into consideration comments that we've received before, but still making sure we provide the right relevant detail on the corporate risks.
Yeah, thanks. I observed that.
I certainly congratulate staff on the report. It's one of the better risk reports I've seen. So I'll wish to pass that on.
Mm-hmm.
Through the chair, Chris Sweet, our risk expert, is here to receive it directly.
Well done, Chris.
Yeah, that's good. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Chris?
Through the chair, I'll just provide this report to give you assurance that the management within the administration of council does consider their risks and do take steps to improve the ratings in those risks. I'm quite how I meet regularly with the managers and talk through these risks, and I talk in depth with them about the controls that they have in place. So it's good to provide this as a level of assurance for you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, that comes as an assurance to us too. Yeah. I think that's the point. All right. So are we happy with this motion? If so, would someone like to propose it? Paul, thanks. Seconded. Andrew, thank you.
I'm happy to. Yep.
Those in favour? Gary, thank you very much. Item 7.9 is the audit and risk. Thanks, Chris. Is the audit and risk committee work plan for the remainder of this year and for next year.
Mike, I had a comment, Mr. Chair, that I just couldn't see when we would see the long-term financial plan and the revised asset management plan if it was required.
Yeah.
And I suspect, as management said before, that that's still to be determined, but they're the only missing items I could see in the works plan.
So through the chair, yes, we are still determining the timeframes for those documents landing, which is why it's not included on the work plan currently.
Yep, no problems.
Can I just ask this question? In terms of our specific responsibilities, the long-term financial plan looms as a significant exercise. Are we thinking of handling it just in the normal, just paper reports like this, or is it worth getting a presentation made, or what do you think the best way of handling this is?
So through the chair, I think it would be up to the art committee to determine how they would like that information presented. We certainly could have an informal session to present it, or yeah, and then go through the formal meeting. But certainly open to feedback about what and how the art would like to provide input into that.
Well, I think I put it to members that it's worth having a thought about this, because you know, when we sit here, we've got other agenda items to do, and you know, we're under time pressure and so on. I wonder whether, in some way, just quarantining it, a review of it from the normal drill of the meeting, and in the way that Jade's just described, is worth giving some consideration to. Because I know I'll have questions and I don't want to feel like I've got to drop them all because we've got to deal with the update of the internal audit report. No, that's very important, but other things like that. So what's on the table, I guess, is the idea that we somehow quarantine the discussion of the long-term financial management plan. I don't think we need to organise a separate meeting down here, but something outside of the normal meeting to give these guys a chance to explain to us what the assumptions are and why they've arrived at the views that they have. I think it might be something that the ARC could be expected to engage in.
I'd agree. I'd certainly like to hear a presentation for management on the thinking behind the numbers and what they're trying to achieve and how they're trying to achieve it and why they considered what they considered.
And that might actually reduce the work burden for the long-term financial management plan, because it might obviate the need to, for long reports and written explanations for everything. Yeah. So we're due to consider it in August, was it? When are we due to look at the draft?
Yeah, there's a bit of a timing and sequencing with the draft budget as well, because obviously the draft budget becomes a base year when you project out. I think reading the appetite of the ARC to be involved, I'd probably suggest we probably need to spend a bit more time rather than less time to get it right. So if we can work with the team to see what the value of ARC is and see how it lines up with our current plan, it just might mean that we're going to the chamber a little bit later than that we would probably originally anticipate, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we actually need to get it right.
Okay, why don't let me suggest this. For the purposes of this meeting, we can simply note, Andrew, that the ARC is
The ARC notes that it will receive the long-term financial plan before the end of 2024 for its input and consideration, assumably.
Yeah,
what staff is telling us.
And something like leaves it to management to determine the mode of that discussion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just give that again.
Sorry?
What's that sentence to say?
We'll receive, we'll include attachment 1, but the notes that we'll receive the LT email before the end of 2024, and request management to give consideration to the form of that discussion. Yeah. All good. Any other things on the actual work plan? If not, let's put I've got a proposer.
Happy to move.
Thanks, Andrew. Seconded, Councillor Yeomans. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. That brings us now to Audit and Risk Committee actions arising from meetings. When I looked at this, this is just a wild thought. When I looked at this, I wondered whether it might be best carried over for our other meeting. I might be too much of it. Yeah.
I was about to say through the chair, probably not a bad idea.
Sorry?
Probably not a bad idea.
Yeah. Okay.
This report's presented at every meeting.
Yeah, I know that, but what I'm saying is that we won't consider it now because this is about what we actually do. And so we'll consider it at the informal meeting that we've had to postpone.
You can talk about it.
He might be just dealing with that now.
Can't make any decisions.
Yep. That's what I was just thinking.
Well, we'll just make a formal meeting then.
Do you need to defer it to the next formal meeting?
Well,
After
I
the
think
formal
it's the meeting that we've had to defer that was going to follow this meeting. And it seemed to me that this report was sort of bread and butter for that meeting because it's really about the things that we do. And so I was going to suggest that we think about deferring it for that. Desmond?
Through the chair, so the meeting I think that you're referring to is where we're discussing the terms of reference and meeting procedures. That's an informal meeting, so a decision can't be made at that meeting. So would you want to defer this till the next formal meeting of ARC?
Well, I'm not sure I don't make the informal meeting formal.
So, Chair, my suggestion would be defer this to the next meeting and have the formal meeting can make decisions that we need to at the next meeting. Because there's a reason I think we're it has just occurred to me that it's relevant to this discussion and such, but I'm slightly in Tasmania at the next meeting in September.
Okay, so if we're all in agreement with Paul's suggestion, we need to get the form of words right, Paul. Audit and Risk Committee, decided to defer consideration of this meeting to the next meeting.
Do we have to say when? September? In September. Yep. Do we need to say why, as in because we're having the phone meeting time, we just do it?
No, let's just do it. Yeah. Yeah. Would be my suggestion. Everyone happy? Someone want to move that? Paul, seconded. Councillor Yeomans, all those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Now the next 30 items.
Excuse me. Mr. Chair, I'm wondering, given the challenges we've had to schedule this environment at the end of this, probably have a discussion on that so we can actually have the environment on September meeting. Just a suggestion. After we're finished.
I'd love to, but we don't have to do it as part of this meeting, right? Because there's no agenda item to do it under. Yeah? Okay.
Just check the urgent business.
Sorry?
Just ask them if they have any urgent business.
All right, so yeah, anyone got any urgent business? Okay, if not, can we move on to these two confidential items, please? Now, what do we have to do? Have the cone of silence here.
We have to move this motion. It's on the screen.
All right.
Carry that. Get a move.
Happy to move.
Yep, all right, thank you, Sandra. Seconded. Thanks, Paul. All those in favour? Carried, thank you.
Now we're in.
Okay, now we're in confidence.